Governor Spencer Cox signed a pair of measures requiring age verification for anyone in the state who wants to use social media. It also requires parental consent before kids can sign up for sites like TikTok and Instagram. The law also prohibits kids from using social media between 10:30 p.m. and 6:30 a.m. The law also seeking to prevent tech companies from luring kids to their apps by using addictive features. The social media regulations as concerns increase about how the platforms are affecting youth mental health. The order is set to take effect in March.
On Capitol Hill today, lawmakers continue to fight over a potential parental bill of rights.
This is about promoting transparency. It is our job.
It does not promote parent-teacher partnerships. It just creates division in our school.
Republicans and Democrats are at odds over the bill, which aims to give parents more control over their child's education. Republicans say the move protects children from some things taught in the classroom. Meanwhile, Democrats argue the bill creates division and will lead to more book bans. A final House vote on this legislation is expected on Friday, but it has little chance of being passed in the Senate.
The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division are
concerned parents by this administration is a gross assault by the federal government.
Johnson says the First Amendment protects a parent's right to speak and advocate for their children.
But that right has been significantly stifled over the past few years because leftists have decided they apparently know better than parents do.
But Representative Mary Gay Scanlon sees things differently. She says the attempt to turn classrooms into the epicenter of divisive culture wars is the real First Amendment threat.
Extremists are imposing their beliefs on all students and parents through library book bans, bans on certain subjects in the public school curricula, and censorship of educators.
Nicole Neely is the president of Parents Defending Education. She says moms and dads became fearful after the DOJ issued a memorandum. It directed the FBI to create a domestic terrorist file. The file was intended to capture evidence from parental protests.
Parents have a constitutional right to assemble, to speak, to petition their government for a redress of grievances.
But airing these concerns, she says, is now viewed by elected officials as violent, offensive, or hateful. Tiffany Justice, a co-founder of the parents group Moms for Liberty, says parents have the fundamental right to direct the upbringing of their children.
Parental rights do not stop at the classroom door. We do not co-parent with the government.
Justice reflected on the frustration parents felt during the pandemic, with schools closed with no end in sight, as their children's development regressed and depression and anxiety increased.
And then they turned to their school boards to try to understand why it was okay for people to gather and riot in the streets and not for children to gather and learn in classrooms.
But she says parents were silenced and the FBI was used as a weapon against them by the Department of Justice. But Representative Gerald Nadler says there is little evidence for such claims, calling it a non-existent conspiracy. Daniel Monahan,
What?
NCD News.
Bullshit.
Educators, administrators, and students across New York State attended. There, they broke out into classrooms and discussed how to strategically incorporate gender-based ideology into lesson planning. Here's special education teacher Cynthia Clough from the Albany School District.
You can just be, I don't want to use the word insidious. The word I want to use is just quietly jazz story. Or have, your drag queens come in and read the jazz story if you want to. Or you could just quietly read books. Don't even bring attention to them. If you're writing a math sheet, write a math sheet and put a picture of someone on there who's like, a non-binary, maybe looking kind of person.
That's Michael Smith, a world languages teacher of Long Island, one of Assistant Superintendent David Casamento's teachers who works in the East Meadow School District.
I decide to come in with makeup and bigger shoulder pads. Am I really doing drag? Am I just being me? Where does the line fall? So I think that introduction of it really be as simple as saying, hey, we're going to read a book from Dr. Seuss, and here's a quote from Martin Luther King, and here's a quote from RuPaul, and just having little kind of drops of exposure to somebody's upbringing. I mean, that's what settles into our psyche as what normalcy is, right? More exposure. And people that have extreme culture shock or people that are isolated and aren't exposed to somebody who's different. You grow up in New York, you walk down the street, you see 74 different kinds of people all the time.
I remember the first time I went swimming after my top surgery. It was awesome. And I never swam before that. I never went to the beach. So there's things I would choose to not do in navigating my situation so that it felt most comfortable to me. And I was working very physical jobs at that time. I spent about 6 years saving up for my top surgery because it wasn't covered by health insurance back then. And finding and working physical jobs, saving money, traveling for surgery. I traveled to San Francisco, and there were a lot of barriers at the time, which is why I'm so grateful with Northwell Health and the development of health systems on Long Island. It's so encouraging to see the change that we're kind of in the middle of that change. We're in that period of history where things are progressing.
And so one of the courses that I was teaching was reaching out to our gay and transgender students. And these kids just coming up to me, I just want to share with you that I identify as trans, and I really prefer this. Please don't tell home. And I didn't realize how many kids were like this. So those are the subtle things that I think make the ripples that make waves. Because that was the class that I was like, let's watch some drag, let's talk about it, let's have fun. But the people that do teach it's great. It's Teacher Education Institute, and they have reaching out to our gay transgender students. It's affordable, pretty normal mothers as well. So if somebody who's really indifferent about their identity, where they are, and growing up,
What's really interesting is this is all filmed in New York, mostly in Long Island, and these are educators throughout the state. As you can imagine, this is probably happening across the country, and they really just gather, right, to share ideas. And when you imagine that they're going to share ideas about, are they going to teach kids math or reading or writing? No, they're there teaching kids DEI. They're teaching kids that they can be any gender they want. But what's most telling and most revealing of all this, Larry, is that they don't want the parents to find out. Right. Because they know that parents care about their kids more than anything else. And what we've seen as a result of our videos coming out, you see that these parents go to these school board meetings that demand accountability. And one of the educators we exposed in Long Island has been so far reassigned. He's an assistant superintendent. He was reassigned so far. So there's been a lot of fallout as a result of our videos in the Long Island area.
What happened? Did the school issue a statement saying we're not doing this? Did they acknowledge it? What did the school say?
So it depends. There's several schools involved here. So in one of the cases, they admit, we're doing DEI and it's important to have inclusivity and diversity and we value these things. But then they kind of approached the more controversial topics. One of them was, for example, hiring discrimination. So, we have to investigate this, right? So they don't outright call out the issue. They'll say they'll look into it, right? But as you can imagine, parents aren't taking that as, I fully trust that you will look into it. So there is more to come from parents. They're still putting pressure on these school boards, specifically the superintendents, to demand answers. But we've seen so many reactions, so many people message Project Veritas saying, thank you. I'm in Long Island. Thank you for exposing this. I didn't even know this was happening in my district.
Now, Mario, is it me or is there some sort of issue that I don't know about regarding kids not knowing their gender, regarding kids who believe that they're trans? I grew up in the 60s, and I can't recall a single issue, a single kid, to my knowledge, where this was an issue. Is this a thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty mind-boggling. I went to school in the early 2000s. I also don't recall that being a thing. It seems that it's come out more recently in the last 5 to 10 years. And what it looks from these videos that these teachers are really forcing this upon kids. One of the people you played there, she literally said, "This is our time to shine. Elementary educators, let's get rid of the binary. Let's get rid of boys and girls." I mean, that was probably the most overt thing I've ever heard. What does that mean? We're going to get rid of boys and girls. And why do you seek to do that? What is the point of getting rid of boys and girls?
Well, that's what I was going to say next. What's the end game? Why?
Right. So, I mean, it's I think the video kind of speaks for itself. It's very clear that these educators have a political objective. They obviously are on one side of the spectrum and probably on the very far end of that spectrum, right? So as you saw, she has these LGBT trans flags in her classroom. She says that, another very telling moment, her tenure allows her to do these things, right? It says, I'm going to my advice to young educators is get some years on the books, and then you can move on, right? Let's do this quietly and slowly. So there's a whole process, a plan, and most certainly it appears that they want these kids not only to change their gender, but most likely change their politics. So when they're grown, they will be pushing the same type of agenda on the next generation.
And activists.
TikTok is a weapon being used to groom our kids. Every single day in America, our children are under attack. Predators are lurking everywhere, trying to get access to your children to groom them.
Guys, the next phase of teen despair, of children's despair is here, and it's delivered by a Chinese algorithm. We have to ban it today.
Among them, 2 mothers bared out their concerns.
My main concern is girls. It's an epidemic at the moment with girls and anxiety and depression, and it's not coming from, we know where it's coming from. This is not a hard one to figure out, so I don't see why it would be that challenging to do what we're asking, which is ban TikTok.
I mean, if you look at the instances of people saying that they're transgender over the past 4 or 5 years, where it's grown exponentially, you have to look at what could be influencing that. And TikTok has exploded as an app. And so they have to have some sort of influence in the content that they provide that would make kids feel like they want to change who they are.
An activist sounded a stronger warning, urging Congress to take action.
So I'd like to speak directly to any members of Congress who are still on the fence about how they're going to vote on this and the American people. There's a very simple question that we all need to answer, and it's this. If China had soldiers showing up after school to American schools, picking up kids, taking them to indoctrination centers, and then teaching those kids what they want to teach them to produce a future where our children hate our own country, we would all stand up against it. Congress would act. This wouldn't be partisan, and it shouldn't be partisan. If you care about our kids, you have to realize this is not an app. This is a weapon.
Last week, the Biden administration demanded that TikTok's Chinese owners divest their stakes. Otherwise, they would face a potential ban. Despite objections, far more lawmakers support the move. Utah has been
that open borders policy has undermined Black Americans economically, educationally, in terms of, all of the real metrics from a socioeconomic perspective. We are now the third largest group in the United States, second to Hispanics, and that is only because of immigration, and that is after 1980. And that's significant in terms of our political power.
Denise, I'm in Los Angeles. I don't know if you've heard about this, but a few months ago, 4 members, they all were Hispanic, LA City Council, were secretly taped. And they were all talking about how to screw this person, screw that person. They made racial epithets. They even made epithets against other Mexicans. And it was all about how we, meaning Hispanics, can retain our power.
Right.
I thought that the very Black people that have no problem whatsoever with open borders are now bringing in people who are now conspiring to keep them out of power and to keep the Hispanics in power.
Yeah, exactly. So, people derive the idea of replacement theory, but there is a replacement that's happening. Intentional, unintentional, doesn't matter. For Black Americans, that replacement has already happened again. We've moved to third largest group. So we're a minority in the country where we were a founding population, and that is because of immigration. And I think there are ways that Black Americans have assessed that because of the history of race and racism and our whole trajectory as a founding population, that the best, quickest, I suppose, way to get to equity or equality is to side with non-white people, right? Is to not side with the Black and white folk who were the founding population of this nation, but to look outside our borders to develop some new Black and brown BIPOC POC coalition. But as you stated, Larry, that situation in LA is evidence that the people who are coming into the nation are benefiting more from that coalition than the people who were, whose bones are buried in this country for the last 200 years.
Now, Denise, it's one thing to call people like you and Peter Kirsanow and Larry Elder sellouts, but you really can't do that with Coretta Scott King and Barbara Jordan. Barbara Jordan, the long deceased Democrat from Texas, who was beloved by Blacks, held hearings on immigration and talked about the threat, as Peter pointed out that illegal immigrants pose to jobs and to wages. And Coretta Scott King wrote a letter to Congress when Congress was considering watering down sanctions against employers who knowingly hire illegal aliens. So it's hard to call those two people sellouts.
Well, that's probably why they selectively quote folk, right? So we talk about Frederick Douglass. To carry forth your example, Frederick Douglass championed a Chinese-American man born in America, went to China. Some legislation was passed while he was abroad. Frederick Douglass championed his being able to come back into America, and he also championed immigration in a way. Then, when the borders got really open and the numbers started to roll in, Douglass's own family members were displaced by immigrants in ethnic unions that they were developing. He realized what was happening, and he changed his tune to the idea that we need to first serve the people who are already here before we serve the rest of the world. And so people can change their mind. Fortunately, Mrs. King and Honorable Barbara Jordan saw it for what it is. And Douglass was quite a while ago, so he didn't have the benefit of all of that history that we do now. So in this type of, erasure of our borders, and even his most recent adaptation of what I call, an appropriation of Donald Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, even that is an ode toward just finding more and more ways to let more and more people in. And the problem that I have with this, besides the numbers and the economic and political impact on multi-generational Americans, both Black, white, and other, is the idea that we are not Americanizing the people who we allow into the country. There's a sizable portion, and I can't remember the exact statistic at the moment, but there's a sizable portion of people who live in our country who've been here for a while, and they speak no functional English language. So what about this process of allowing immigration at such a pace and at such a number where we are creating citizens who are truly dedicated to America as we've woven it, rather than creating countries within our country?
Pamela Denise Long, thank you so much for coming on. God bless.